Okay, I'm speaking with Dan Schweitzer of New York Holographic Laboratories. How are you doing, Dan?
I'm very fine, Frank. How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you. I want to thank you very much for taking the time to come on the show.
Thank you. Listen, first, before we get started on anything, I want to congratulate you for the great things that you've been doing here with this talk show. I find it very compelling, and I think it's been great for holography. I love your spirit, and
thank you very much.
I'm just totally in awe of all you've managed to accomplish in the past year or two. It's been quite amazing.
Well, I'm a real nutcase.
You must be. Welcome to the nutcase.
Yeah. I know the listeners are going to be very happy to hear you on here, and one of the things that's nice about the show is the fact that there's probably so many people out there who have read about your work, have been able to see your work in galleries and different places, and also all the things that's been written about you in the different books out there for holography. And here,
yeah, I've been pretty lucky.
And one of the things, I guess, that just leads me into the fact that I read about you probably when I was back in high school in books on holography. We've all seen so many people come and go in this field. What do you credit your longevity to?
Gee, what a list. I think it's just the passion for holography, I think. It just keeps me buoyed up.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I think I'm losing it, I think about what it is that we're doing here, and I get re-inspired, and I just keep pushing because I believe in it so intensely in so many of its different levels of application.
Your lab was around, I would say, early 70s or before?
Yeah, it's not to belabor the historical side of it, but the lab that Sam Moret and I started in 1976 was really basically having taken over the New York School of Holography, which began in 1972, where I was a teacher and learned myself.
Did Jody Burns, was he involved with that or anything?
That's absolutely right. Jody Burns it was totally inspired at the time and got the ball rolling for holography in New York, and it's to him that I owe the greatest amount of gratitude for having gotten me started. My background was in the theater and film and so forth.
Yes.
So for me, it was really quite a looking-glass experience falling into it. And we all probably feel the same way, that we're still doing it, getting in on the ground floor of what we know to be an astounding medium. What
was the attraction?
It
was a different time back then.
Well, it was a different time, absolutely. It was interesting that in the courses that I took, very few of us knew really what was going on. I learned from people who only had just recently learned themselves. And so there was a lot of exploration, a lot of discovery going on in those days. Every time you did something, and it's still the same way, you feel like you were inventing it for the first time, and that's what keeps it exciting and fresh. Yeah. You obviously chose to work with white light transmission holography. Was there a reason behind that? Pretty much so. I think if you could attribute schools for holography, I would say that the New York, for the most part, the New York holographers were of that school of white light transmission, perhaps because of Steve Benton's influence in the early days. Mm-hmm. He conducted a course, two courses actually, in rainbow holography in the early days. We were all very curious about it. The reason that it appealed most to me, I think, was that it was not so much documentation. I see reflection holography very often as being an incredible form for documenting existing subjects. Mm-hmm. And I think the appeal for the rainbow holography was that it doesn't actually document quite as well as it does allow for you a greater amount of volume to record viewable scene depth front to back. And it allowed for a different way of controlling color through the engineering of the camera as opposed to the chemistry in the reflection hologram. Yes. And so it became much more like light sculpture for a lot of us. Mm-hmm. And the idea of sculpting energy was really an extraordinary idea from the start, and clearly that's what rainbow holography has sort of become. Although not to say that it can't be used to document, it excels when you wish to bend and interpret the light itself. It's really quite interesting. You've incorporated sculpture itself into some of your pieces, right? Yes, I have. I started out by doing small sculptures for the content of the holograms, and the culmination of that sort of venture for me was the completion of a holographic triptych in which I did a triptych hologram of a gallery of holograms. Mm-hmm. And in each panel there was there were holograms inside the hologram, and in one case there was a hologram within a hologram within a hologram within a hologram of a photograph.
Yes, yes.
So it went several layers back, trying to increase the depth of the scene and so forth.
I think one of the early pieces that I remember of yours when I was younger was, I believe it was a man sitting at a desk looking out a window.
Yes, that's a very early work. It was called, yes, it was an early, probably my first larger format rainbow hologram.
Mm-hmm.
And it was called Sendera, and it was a fairly pivotal piece for me, and from there I began to incorporate those kinds of images inside. And then subsequent to that, when I began to understand what it was to sculpt the energy, then I would work on projects that were involved with some kind of a special effect, maybe an optical animation or something, and then incorporate that into the scene with the sculptural subjects. And then the next step was to break through the film plane and then to begin sculpting in front of the plane with the light, where the solid object, now the finished sculpture, interrelates to the light sculpture. So now these have become actual physical sculptures that use holograms as optical elements in the scene.
Do you ever feel stuck in holography, like the technology or the technique hasn't evolved in the last 20 years?
You know, I feel that on a technical level, but at the same time, I think that there are always reasons for these things, and one of them, I think, is that when you have limitations and you begin to focus on what those limitations are, you know where the borders and the barriers are.
Mm-hmm.
It just gives you a framework within to work, and you stretch that, and you push aside, you push it where you want it to go as slowly as or as fast as you need to go. And I find that it offers whatever context you have. Your context is usually controlled by what the technology will offer, and that's the space you've got to work with, so you do it interestingly, I think.
As far as your work, I know you could probably list exhibits that you've had your work in, but would you like to cover some of the exhibits that are a little bit more meaningful to you in your memory?
I guess holography is unique in that it has always been so new and dynamic that it oftentimes broke down doors that one might not normally do with other media. For example, in the early days, Jody Burns et al., other people's influences as well, managed to open up a showing for us at the Museum of Modern Art, and very early in the game to do that, but at the same time a very exciting experience. It gave us a chance to just sort of show what we're doing, and so that was for a beginner, that was an extraordinary experience. And then from there, of course, the many group shows that we've done, the Museum of Holography in New York, which unfortunately is no longer there for us, was always there as an outlet for viewing my work. And then later on in the travels, one of the nice things about holography, it allows you to travel some and build yourself a nice little, your own form of glamorous lifestyle, I think. But I've had some great times in Europe and so forth. I think one of the shows that stands out in my mind is a show in Hamburg, Germany, which was an extraordinary chance for us at the Hamburger Kunsthalle, which is a very reputable art museum, and we enjoyed very much the sense of continuity that we got from seeing the very old classic artworks sort of bleeding into the newer technology that was ours on the next floor up. Another extraordinary experience was an exhibition and a conference recently in Berlin, headed up by Dieter Jung. There was an extraordinary lecture series for about a week where scientists, mathematicians, poets, magicians, as I recall, I think there was even someone there involved with designing mirages. It was an extraordinary event. It's these kinds of exciting things that deal with holography and all of its accessories that it gets very exciting. So yeah, I've had quite a few memorable travels.
Do you remember anything at all with Salvador Dali?
I do remember. He's actually probably more responsible for my having worked in the medium than anyone. It was his work that I saw first that I enjoyed so much. His laser transmission holograms, which I believe were done by Selwyn Lissack back in the early days. And it was my having saved one of Selwyn's portraits of Salvador Dali that they were working on at the time from being damaged in a flood that I was rewarded for my valor for having saved the hologram by being given a course in holography. And so my first introduction happened through Salvador Dali, actually.
Why don't you tell everyone where your studio is located in New York?
Our current studio here in Manhattan is it's at 176 East 3rd Street, and we've been here about 10 years. The earlier location was the one that so many people knew about underneath the Quad Movie Theater on 13th Street in Manhattan. But now we're on the east side, and we've got 2 studios here. And my partner, Sam Moret, of course, comes and goes in his various and sundry activities, recently having finished a residency in Cologne, Germany. And the great passion that I have now, of course, is that I've recently begun working with Anna Maria Nicholson at the Center for the Holographic Arts.
Yes, that's in Brooklyn.
Exciting venture.
In Brooklyn?
That's in Queens, actually. It's just across the river from Manhattan, one stop on the train right near this the new home of the Museum of Modern Art, actually, in the not too distant future. Is going to have a temporary home near where we are in Long Island City in Queens. We're in a good spot, and we have our artist in residency program up and running. We're into our second cycle, and we're currently mounting an exhibition of the works that resulted from the first cycle of awardees for this program that we have been running. It's funded by the Shearwater Foundation. Many thanks to them for making this equipment available to the holographic community. We want to make certain that people who are listening and tuned in know that our site at holocenter.com has guidelines for grant proposals for people who would like to work with pulse lasers. So it's a great opportunity to get in there and make some holograms.
I'll make sure there's a link on the HoloTalk page so people can visit that site, too.
That would be great.
You know, to me, Sam's almost like a mystery man.
Sam, Sam is a mystery man.
I've always heard the term Dan and Sam.
Yeah, well, his work is extraordinary.
Yeah, I think he works. I've seen some pieces of his that he combined with neon and different things.
Yes, he did begin incorporating neon sculpture with holograms, and did some wonderful works during that period where he had glass plinths. And he's a very brilliant artist. Sam was a painter before he got involved with holography, and I loved his painting very much. And he very much, in my mind, exemplifies the way a painter grows into a new medium. And his new medium of holography has had an interesting way of interpreting his painting.
And he's still very active creating holograms, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Wow.
He's currently, he was actually one of the grant recipients for our first cycle at the center, which afforded him the opportunity of making a sculptural project, which he's working on right now. So his piece will be in this our first opening, which will be at the center for 2 weeks, starting April 7th.
Yes.
And from there it will travel to Syzygy Gallery in Fort Myers, and then on to the Tucson Museum of Contemporary Art.
Wow.
So we're launching that show, and should be a good one.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, you offer workshop programs at your New York studios as well, right?
Yes, I have always taught. That's been something that I found the best way to learn is to teach. And also at a college in New York as well? Yes, I have a course that runs, basic and advanced course that runs at the School of Visual Arts here in Lower Manhattan. And this session we have 10 great students that have been doing some really interesting work. We're just moving now into rainbow holography. Our first course deals with laser transmission and white light reflection. And our advanced now we're dealing with the rainbows, and they're starting to uncover the great secrets of that wonderful little technology. Do they have a lab there and everything right there? They have a small lab at the SVA. At times when classes this large, I bring them over to my studio because we can get more work done there. But they do have a nice workable lab there, a small one, but it works. What do you think of the new work with the diodes? I'm very excited by this. I'm glad to see that you've really put your nose to the wheel on this one. I'm very, very happy with the results. I think I mentioned to you prior to this current conversation that I'd like to interview you sometime. Oh, really? I'd like to find out. I'd like to find out your origins, etc. But we'll deal with that issue later on. In any case, yes, the diode lasers are a terrific new contribution. I really like what it's going to do for the beginner, and I'm even hoping that soon I might begin to uncover the possibilities as a more advanced worker in the field to use some of these diodes to make holograms. I really hope that can happen.
Yeah, they have a few things you need to get used to working with them, but once you get used to them, it's okay.
Well, that's true of everything, isn't it?
Yes, it is true. Yeah. What's the latest work that you're working on now?
The current, what I'm doing right now is I'm working on the next in a series of works that I call the Sleeper series. I have an odd way of working. Sometimes I work differently each time, but I do like to work with special effects. And there is a current work that I'm doing where I'm dealing with an optical animation where an image will appear to move in a situation, of course, in holography where you can't have anything moving, of course.
Yes.
So I will take, for example, an object that might look, in the case of the one that I'm thinking of, it's not the current one, but a prior one, the one I'm thinking of, which was the original subject was a kitchen dish drainer, you know, the slats and horizontal lines. And I have this little thing I call my time machine, which is a large parabolic mirror made of metal with a dent in it. I'm giving away my secret here, of course.
Okay.
But the way that the dent reflects the flat moving, or the flat slats, causes it to distort in such a way that it actually literally turns it into a spinning disc.
Oh, really?
And it's an exquisite feeling, the way the light moves as you move from left to right. And what I've done is I've taken that little dent and then removed all of the context from it so that it just appears to be a swirling bit of light. And it turns out to look very much like a flying saucer. I have completed a large format one, actually, at John Perry's studio, where he was so helpful in helping me make this spinning disc project about maybe 7 feet into the room.
Oh, my goodness.
With a nice blue sky, white cloud background. And I haven't quite figured out where I want to take it from there. These things sometimes take time and study.
Yeah.
But a very exciting idea to be able to make projected images moving. It really is what I consider to be sculpting energy. And there's something the way I've always had a fascination with the way light behaves, of course, as I think a lot of us have. And so I do things like if you understand that a lens will flop an image in one direction and then perhaps in another, you know, why you have to load your slides backwards.
Yeah.
I got very interested, for example, in that little moment of time over which it travels from flopping in its horizontal and the vertical direction. And I decided to image that using laser light, simply because it stays in focus to infinity in the way that I've set it up. And so if I capture that moving image on a piece of frosted glass, I discovered that I could make an animation of it. And so in photography, they call it the circle of confusion. I think I might have mentioned that. And as it turns out, it's my own sort of rendering of the way light behaves. And as you move from left to right in front of the hologram, the light will tumble and fall towards you through the film plane and then beyond your shoulder.
Oh, my goodness.
So it's kind of what I want to do, is involve the viewer in the activity of the hologram itself. I've always seen holography as being a cinema thing in a way. I guess that's why I use sort of narrative tableau and so forth. I guess the background in theater has a lot to do with that.
Well, these are the holograms that people should see rather than the coffee cups and the puppies.
Yeah, well, it's difficult to get them out there. You know, it's actually not difficult if one just takes the time to show this work in the proper way. I'm so busy making work, I'm really not terribly good at getting it out there visible. I need someone to help me with that. So,
Are you still working with AGFA?
We are. You know, I'm a little bit behind the times here. We have not as yet moved into the new possibilities with the BB plates. I'm looking forward to getting our assistants out at the Center for the Holographic Arts to begin testing, and each time we dedicate ourselves to that idea, we get a new AIR who comes in and takes our time, and we have to go do this magic for them.
Well, you must be stockpiled with AGFA stuff.
We have some. We have enough to get us through the next session, I would say, and then we're going to have to search for new material, and I look forward to testing the new stuff. I've heard good things about a few different materials. I think these things you have to make your own, and once we do that, we'll be back in gear, I think. Yeah.
I have one 8x10 AGFA plate left. That's all I have of AGFA.
Oh, really? Well, we have no plates, but fortunately at the center we do have a laminating machine.
Oh, I see.
So we, although It's never easy in holography. It may be the most exciting thing in the area, but it is never quite as easy as you'd like it to be. So the laminations are often faulty, and we have to go back and redo and get it right. But we're working on it.
When you work with artists, do you seem to get the feeling that they're frustrated when they find out what they can do and what they can't do with holography?
You know, I very seldom have I had that happen.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I have a way of sort of guiding people in the direction and affording them a context in general if I'm in charge of the situation, providing them with a context where they begin to understand what the possibilities are within the confines of the medium.
Mm-hmm.
I think probably my one failure was with Robert Rauschenberg, unfortunately, who I think was a little too much all at once when we tried to work with him back in the old days of the Museum of Holography. But there have been so many who've taken to it. And in fact, this project, I was just speaking with Matthew Schreiber, who is our current artist in residence this week, and he was talking about the exciting ventures he had with so many very well-known artists with this work that was done at the C Project based in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a little bit of translation, you know. It's part of what you, I think, do, and what I do is you try and make this data workable for the person who wishes to use it to express himself.
Mm-hmm.
And you try and not editorialize their views as much as you can, but at the same time you have to guide them in what really is feasible given the amount of time one has to do it.
Do you think the argument about holography as a legitimate medium has diminished somewhat?
No, I think it's just beginning. You know, we're just close to it, Frank. We don't understand. We're not looking at this thing from the proper perspective when we see it that way.
Yeah.
I think it's just beginning. I think that holography as an art form began on a little shaky footing, and for obvious reasons. In the early days, the work that was being produced was not, you know, it was experimental, a lot of it, and a lot of times it was shown without that information having been provided. I'm thinking of the ICP show where a critic in the New York Times lambasted it, and rightfully so, but he didn't understand the context. It was not an art show. It was a show of the technological possibilities. And that set up a sort of predisposition not to accept holography for a short period. But as work begins to get more and more sophisticated in the hands of artists, and as they begin to understand the vocabulary better and better, they begin to expand their view of what the hologram is and how it might fit into their artistic vision. Mm-hmm. In other words, incorporating into perhaps a larger format, perhaps into installation ideas. I just recently got a postcard from an absolutely beautiful, beautiful piece that I'm seeing here from Sally Weber, for example, called Matrix, which is installed in Los Angeles area. I mean, this is an application of holography that arrives at where it can be. It is an extraordinarily colorful, just a magnificent bath of prismatic and wonderful light. It's very tastefully done. And incorporates all sorts of ritualistic and technological patterns and weaves and so forth. So much can be done with this medium, and it's just now that artists are beginning to really gain control of it.
Do you think the artists are a little bit more embracing of technology now because of the digital revolution?
It would seem that it's faster, wouldn't it?
Yes.
I feel that from my SVA students. Occasionally, where it's a more instant gratification with the computer.
Yeah. But do you think that helps holography? The fact that holography is also based on a technology?
Well, it's very different, isn't it? You know, holography is very analog.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. Yeah.
It's much more. To my eyes, it's much more elegant because it is. There's just something about working with those waves that is so magical.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, you do have it in your blood, don't you?
Well, I do.
Yes, you do.
I think my blood is composed mostly of light
yes.
and hot air, as you've heard for the past 20 minutes.
Your blood is at 6328.
Absolutely. Very good way of putting it. Very good way of putting it. I don't live, I laze.
Yeah. Well, Dan, I want to thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedule to come on the show, and I'm sure people are just happy as toast to be able to come onto the site and listen to you talk about the work that you've done over the years.
Well, I'm flattered that you chose to interview me. I do appreciate it.
So let's just mention one more time that exhibit that you have coming up at your center in Queens.
Yes, it's the Center for the Holographic Arts at 45-10 Court Square in in Long Island City, New York, just across the river from Manhattan, opening on April 7th. And we have 4 of our AIR recipients, 5 actually, counting Margaret Benyon from England. It's going to be a wonderful show. We'll be there for 2 weeks. And
I heard that Margaret Benyon's going to be knighted by the Queen.
Oh, absolutely, yes. I just entered that into... we have a newsletter, actually, at the center site.
Okay.
It's primarily oriented toward what's going on in the arts, and it's called Echo, and not as sophisticated as what you've got cooking here, but I'm pleased as punch to be able to do it. And one of the stories is about Margaret's receiving Her Majesty's Award for her contributions and her work in holography, which is extraordinary. You see, Frank, we have arrived.
Yes, we have.
We've been ordained by royalty. I told you, it's all very glamorous, I think.
Yeah. Why don't you take a minute to go down the list of participants in the show?
Ikuo Nakamura, Sam Moret, Margaret Benyon, Mary Harmon, and Dean Heddy.
What is it that you look for when you receive a proposal to make someone a successful candidate?
Well, our guidelines pretty much take care of all of that. If one goes to our site, you'll see what the guidelines are. But really all we're asking for is a simple one-page description of the idea, and along with your CV, your resume, and simple kind of stuff, and then support materials that might help us understand what it is that the artist wants to achieve. And then, of course, we submit all of this to the panelists, and then they make their selections based upon the data that we receive from the artist. So it's not up to us, but that's sort of the direction that we're looking. Keep it simple, and if it's good, I'm sure it will get selected. So, we're very grateful to the Shearwater Foundation for making this. And pretty much if they go to the site, they'll see it at holocenter.com.
Okay.
Yeah?
Well, Dan, thank you very much.
I thank you, Frank.
Okay. I'll talk to you later.
All right.
Bye.
Take care.